So what I'm hearing is like, where do we take the conversation from here? Sort of where are some specific places people can go to organize around this? And also, like, how can we take the first steps in sort of not replicating what Andrea was saying, sort of like the lessons that we've learned from the anti-violence movement? Yes or no? That's more or less?
Well, yeah, definitely talk to about. We also seem to be, as we try to want to help, we kind of worsen the problem.
Yeah. So how not to hurt more while we're trying to quote unquote help, right? And so I think that, you know, Andrea can speak to that very well, and Sharmili and Jane, you can also jump in on that. Help a sister out.
I just talked a lot. Go ahead.
That is, I mean, it's a tricky question, obviously. If there were, like I said before, if we had a roadmap for how to implement solutions to these issues, and then I would just gladly pass it out and we could all go follow it and like go home and call it a day. But I think that, you know, it has to be really, the solutions have to be really specific to, you know, communities, to individuals. At an individual level, you know, I would suggest to anyone who's working with survivors of sexual assault or domestic violence, like Andrea said, to ask them first what they want or what they need. I would never presume to tell a survivor not to call the police if that is what they felt like was the thing that they needed to do and wanted to do and would make them feel safe. But I think it's a problem that we don't have something else that we can offer to people if they don't want to do that. And so part of it is understanding that there are real reasons why people don't want to call the police, and then part of it is trying to do the other work, the hard work that we need to do to try to create something else that's in place for people.
I want to say something about specifics, and I know how, I've stopped coming to events a lot, right? Because you leave going, oh, they talked about the problem for 100 hours. I want to know what the solutions are, blah, meow, meow. So my thought about that is that there are solutions happening all over the city all the time. So here, an example. Wentworth Gardens was being razzed by the CHA as everything is being razzed and people being displaced, and this caused a huge amount of trauma in the community. Beth's book talks about Miss V and the way in which basically she was made unsafe by city policies, which were demolishing these homes but not providing people with actual safety to be able to live in those homes while the demolition was happening. This was the same thing that was going on at Wentworth Gardens. And so this caused a lot of fighting between the children of new people who were coming in and old people who'd been living there, a lot of difficulty. And somebody who was actually a visionary CHA person reached out to a group called Community Justice for Youth Institute and said to them, we need to figure out how we're going to get people to be able to talk with each other and deal with these conflicts that are going on in this area rather than calling the police all the livelong day, and that wasn't helping anybody. Just getting a lot of young black children arrested for fighting, right? And they were ending up in the system, and then they couldn't come back and live with their parents because they can't live in Section 8. I mean, it was a terrible situation. Well, they started this women's group at Wentworth Garden, started with like maybe 10 women in the community. This group has been it was started as a weekly opportunity for women to get together in peace circle and solve their problems amongst each other without relying on law enforcement. Lo and behold, a couple of years later, this is now the biggest thing people are coming to this all the time. They're like expanding it to 3 nights a week. Folks are talking with each other. Folks are figuring out what was going on with that family, that kid was out of control, and actually stepping up and saying, you know what, I'm going to take Timmy, because I'm 80 years old. I know how to deal with him, right? And all of a sudden, Mrs. Robinson down the street, who was the new person who just came into the building, is taking Timmy after school. And lo and behold, Timmy's doing his homework, right? And this is what we always have done. We have forgotten how to do that because our communities are under assault by the neoliberal state trying to destroy us on a regular basis, right? But we're, in many places, reclaiming that and just doing that work. Not funded, no social workers, nothing. Just people learning how to do that work and stopping the violence. That violence has decreased. People are feeling safer there. Right? So we have a concrete example of something that's gone on in that community, in that neighborhood. So don't tell me that it's hard to do. What it is it takes some effort rather than calling 911 and then sitting back and saying you solved the problem, right? So this is incumbent on us as people us to decide how lazy or how involved we want to be, right? It's not about, so I think that this is where, for me, this notion of constantly thinking, like, we have to analyze what the big solutions are. They're not analytical issues. You know exactly what to do. You've been doing it, right? You know it. When somebody steals from you and it's your cousin, you don't call the cops first. You figure out where the hell he is and you beat him upside the head and you get your thing back, right? No, just kidding. But you don't rely on systems for those things. You rely on systems that are internal to your community. You don't need to go out beyond that system, right? So we know how to do this. It is not that deep, is all I'm saying, to demystify the process for folks, right, who are sitting there going, solution, solution. You have it. We do it. We just have to expand that, and you have to be willing to be one of the people who's doing it in your community as you choose your community to be. It might be your roller derby club. That's okay. It doesn't have to be your whole entire neighborhood, right?
So to build off of what Mariam said a little bit, there is the Storyteller Organizing Project, which Jane had referenced, which has a lot of stories about how people can do community-based accountability like responses. So if you're needing ideas, there are resources out there for ideas. I think that, the thing that I want to make sure gets said is that there are times we idealize the concept of community. And that there are ways in which community, kind of as an idea, has failed the folks who have gone to the community for assistance. And so by that, I mean that we, like at RVA, we've definitely experienced people coming to us and saying, I went to my pastor, I went to my grandma, I went to the block club president, I went to the people in my community who I thought I could trust and who would be helpful. And I also tried the police route, and that didn't work out either, and now I'm coming to you. And so I think that part and parcel of talking about these alternatives is understanding that we still have to confront the patriarchal nature of a lot of our communities, and we still have to confront rape culture. And we still have to confront the ways in which Jacqueline Friedman calls it the social permission to operate. That our society, our communities do create social permission for people to commit violence against women. And that, again, is not about the legal system. That is about each and every one of us and what we do on an individual basis every day, as well as kind of how we respond. And so sometimes it's not about a ready-made community that is responding, but rather a community that gets created in order to respond. And that can be extra legal. But I think it's important that we acknowledge that, one quick example, and Mariam wrote a really powerful piece about this, was the young woman, young girl in Cleveland, Texas, who was gang raped. And that the very poor reporting by a New York Times reporter also really illuminated how much that community was not able to respond, not willing to respond in a way that supported that girl, and that instead was thinking about all of these young men and what's going to happen in their future and poor them, and why was she dressed that way, and all of these things that are so entrenched in the ways in which we think about gender and about sexuality. That community that's not a community, I would say, where's the community-based response coming from, right? That was not a safe community for her. So I think, we have to be willing to, as Jane said, be able to think creatively and not think that this is going to be like, community response in a box, just add water. It is going to take work. And we have to be willing to do that as well.
Can I just add just a quick few things? One is that there's also tools that put out by an organization called Creative Interventions that actually has this toolkit, and what it requires you to do is assess who is your community and who's actually going to give you the support you need, but also then just offers you tools to experiment, and it's going to be an experiment. There's no question about it. We have to be prepared for that and be in it for the long haul around that. But I think we have to do it because the other method is resulting in increased violence. I think we also have to think again about economic justice as what we need to organize around in order to address violence. If you look at the Street Youth Bill of Rights put out by the Young Women's Empowerment Project, they're asking for, I don't know, crazy things like a place to sleep, and food to eat, and a job that actually pays enough to be able to take care of themselves and the people in their community and family. And those are the things that they are identifying that will reduce their vulnerability to violence. That's what we need to be organizing for, immigration reform. All the things that people identify as things they need and things that make them more vulnerable to the kinds of violence we're concerned about need to be back to the center of our organizing, and not as something that you get through an arrest referral system, right? So you'll get that if you get arrested, and then also that doesn't come as part of conditions, like if you stop doing this, if you stop hanging out with these people, if you stop behaving in this way, if you conform your gender to what I want you to. I mean, all those sort of kinds of it shouldn't come at those conditions. They need to come because those are things that we're all entitled to as human beings, and that's the part around anti-violence organizing that was more present at the beginning of the movement that Beth was talking about, and now comes at the end sort of more as part of the system that then requires compliance in other ways.